Well, welcome. Do you go by Cindy or Cynthia?
Cindy.
Cindy. Okay. Well, that's what I thought. I got texted it was Cynthia, but anyway, thank you for, first of all, for doing this. Appreciate you being here. And I always like hearing, some of the successes that people have. And so I understand you have a fairly interesting story to discuss. And so, I think we'll just get right into it. We use a lot about 30 minutes or so to do this if we can, if we can. So, tell us a little bit, where are you located, first of all, Cindy? Where are you at?
Right now I live in Richmond, Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, moved to New England where I met my husband in the late 90s. I met him in 2003. And we just moved to Kentucky this past October.
How you liking Kentucky?
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of close to my roots now because, like I said, I was originally from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah.
It's great,
Yeah, I was going to say you're just across the board. I lived in Indiana for a while when I was a kid, so I'm not too far. We were adjacent to Kentucky too at the south. But
not at all.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. I understand you went through, you had struggled with obesity for much of your life and went through that and had quite a few health issues.
I tell everybody when my doctors ask me how long I've been overweight, I tell them since the day I was born. I weighed over 10 pounds when I was born. So
goodness. Yeah. Can I ask just before we get into that, was your mother also someone that had some issues with obesity, or was she diabetic? Was she diabetic at the time too?
I think she was borderline diabetic.
Yeah.
She was definitely overweight.
Yeah, we see that a lot with with babies, moms that are diabetic or have hyperglycemia. They end up they get big. They get some of these 10, 12, 13, 14 pound babies, which are crazy.
Yeah. I was the biggest of 5.
Yeah. Okay.
She said she had 5, the 3 weighed over 10 pounds.
Yeah, that's some big babies for sure. I think I was a scrawny little 7.5 pound baby, I think. So my mom was my mom was pretty small. She was only about 5'1", so not a big person, but I ended up growing big and tall somehow. But anyway, we'll tell us. So you obviously started out, as a big little baby. So what else happened?
Well, I would slim down as I grew into my school years and then I started putting on weight. Didn't really do a whole lot. It took up a lot of reading and things like that. Right now I'm 63 years old, almost 64. But growing up, all my adult years, I've been morbidly obese. That's sad to say, but yeah. I had my first child. He's 41. I was 22. And when I found out I was pregnant, it was the lowest I had been until now. I was at 180. And that was after losing weight and all that. He was another big baby. But yeah. I was afraid of the health issues. There's heart disease in my family. There's high blood pressure, which I've battled since I was a teenager. And pre-diabetes, both of my parents. It was scary. So after I met my husband, I was at the highest weight ever at almost 300 pounds. And I started looking into gastric bypass surgery. And, I'm like, I don't know what I want to. Started going to support meetings and did all the testing with the neurologist and all that stuff. And in 2007, I went ahead and had it done. It wasn't long after I found out I had hyperinsulinemic hypoglycaemia as a result of the gastric bypass. And it was pretty scary. So anytime I ate anything with a lot of carbs or a lot of sugar, a lot of insulin would be produced. It would cause my blood sugar to just bottom out. So it was like, all right, I got to do something. But so I started, and after gastric bypass, they tell you eat whole grain foods and brown rices and whole grain pasta and, stay away from the white breads, white rice and all that stuff. And instead of eating regular potatoes, eat sweet potatoes, which I didn't like anyway. So I just went about doing what they told me to do. And I had dropped about 80 pounds after the surgery, but then it started creeping back up. Just this typical roller coaster with every fad diet I had tried since I was young. And when I met my husband, well, no, that was then. Then in 2014, I started getting really bad knees. My knees were crap, to say the least. I had my first knee replacement done in 2014. And my second one was done in 2017, and it got infected. So, this not being able to move around for a while on months and months of antibiotics. And I was feeling really bad. And then in 2020, my sister started researching diets for her daughter and for herself. And she found keto. And she said, you really need to check this out. And sent me to Dr. Berry website or videos. And I jumped on board in September. At that time, I weighed 269.9. And I'm proud to say right now I'm at 179 and have a little bit of ways to go. No more blood pressure meds. In the interim there, after my knee replacements, I found out I had primary and secondary lymphedema. And that really rocked everything. Looking up all the information on lymphedema and images scared me a lot. So with keto and, it's all been great. I feel a lot better. I wear compression socks for the lymphedema, and I don't have all that swelling. I don't know if it's because of those or the way I'm eating or a combination of the two, but it's good.
Well, it's a couple things that, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, so I've replaced a lot of knees over the years, and
I know you are.
it's always a tragedy when one gets infected because, unfortunately, I rarely had that happen. But a few times it does. It's obviously a nightmare for the patient, but it's not fun for the surgeon either. And so often, and I don't know if they did this for you, often they'll have to take the knee replacement out and put a temporary spacer in there and revise whole things. Did you go through all that?
She had done, and I love my surgeon. She was great up in New Hampshire. She had the second surgery. We had to have two other ones after that. Right. I had one was an incision and drainage. And then I still had a spot that wasn't healing. She immobilized my leg, put the thing on to do anything, took me out of physical therapy, everything. And it still wasn't healing. So then we went back in and had another incision and drainage done and a poly swap.
Okay. Yeah.
And then all the antibiotics, and it was bad. It was bad.
Yeah, and you're actually lucky because many people the poly swap still isn't adequate, and they end up, because the problem is taking out a knee replacement, you have to chisel it out. It's all cemented to the bone. You end up losing quite a bit of bone with that. The prosthesis you have to put back in is much more. It's a little more challenging to do, and so.
Oh, I'm sure. Before I had my first one done, I started watching a video on a knee replacement, and I had to stop. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, it looks pretty brutal. So I assume you're born around 1959, 1960, given your current age, and
58. I'll be 64 next week.
Okay, so 50. Well, happy birthday, 60. So 50. So back in 1950s, there wasn't a lot of morbid obesity going around. So you would have probably been kind of a kid that was not typical. I mean, you would have been, not like today, where one in I don't know how many kids are 1 in 3 kids are overweight, and there's a certain percentage of them becoming obese. It's very common now.
It was more as I started, like when I got out of high school, and I really started putting the weight on then.
When you got where?
Out of high school.
Out of high school. Okay. Yeah. And your diet was, I don't know. I mean, was it just standard food, I guess? Nothing special? Standard
food, meat, vegetables, potatoes on your plate. Or, that we had a regular thing of pot pies, and, it was just the typical family meals, back then. And then I continued it on because that's what I was raised on with, but then I tried all the different diets. I lose weight, and then you gain 10 times more back, and you lose weight and you gain it back, and it was like crazy.
Yeah, that's a very common thing we see. People go on a diet, they'll do it for a month or two, they'll lose whatever, 10, 20 pounds, and they get frustrated with it, tired of it, and they uh, just don't like the food off. It's just like, I just don't want to eat this stuff all the time. And it's
Right.
tough to do that. And your point is very important, because what we do as young adults, teenagers, and so on and so forth, often follows us the rest of our life. So our dietary patterns, our lifestyle patterns that we sort of lay down during that time is kind of what we do the rest of our life. And so if you're not, so it's very important as parents to sort of intercede in your kids and say, hey, this is how to, to be, at least be cognizant of how nutrition impacts you. And whether you decide to go on a low carb diet or something else, it's important to understand, particularly this processed food that we're dealing
Right.
with. It's such a problem. So you discovered keto recently, low carb keto. I mean, there were, during that time, or there was, Robert Atkins was very popular, 70s, 80s, 90s, that sort of dietary strategy. Did you ever try that at some point?
I did. That was one of the diets I tried, and I don't know if I just wasn't ready for it, or if I just like, okay, I lost some weight, but this isn't going to be good. So I don't know. I just went on to something else, or just stopped, or went back to bad eating habits. And it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah.
But
Hopefully you're off that roller coaster. Having recently ridden a roller coaster. I haven't done that in years. I rode one a couple weeks ago, and it was. I realize why I'm too old for roller coasters, I think.
I know I am. I
Yeah,
barely rode them when I was young, other
yeah,
than the dieting roller coaster.
yeah. Well, the dieting roller coaster. One of the things that you mentioned gastric bypass, and this is something that many people don't realize, because the gastric bypass proponents will say, look, we've got this great weight loss, predictable weight loss, and often people come off that, their diabetes improves, but they
Yeah.
it's used based on short-term data, a year or two follow up. And then when we look at the long-term data on people that have had various different gastric bypass procedures, whether it's Roux-en-Y, sleeve gastrectomy, and some of the other procedures that have done over the years, the long-term results are not particularly that good. People often
No,
regain the weight, as you probably found out talking to other people that have gone through gastric. I'm sure you probably found other people in similar situation where they regain it. And there can be a lot of unfortunate side effects, I guess, where people struggle with substance abuse and depression and alcoholism, and all those things are associated with gastric bypass. And so,
well, thankfully I didn't go those
no,
routes.
no, thankfully you did not. That's good for you. But let me ask you, so you discovered a ketogenic diet, and how has that, why do you think this is different than the roller coaster you've been on? How long have you been able to stay with this, and how does it feel different to you?
Well, I started it September of 2020, when everybody was supposed to be gaining weight because of the pandemic, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to let it get me down. It is what it is. And I think I was ready. I was determined. And like I said, my sister researched this, and she was very persuasive and very, very persistent. I owe her a lot. Um, but it was easy because, to me, I love meat. And if I can do that, I'm good. And my diet right now consists of mostly meat, a lot of eggs, some cheese, a little bit of vegetable on occasion, but it's good.
Yeah, it's very, very similar to my diet, except I don't
Mhm.
even bother with the vegetables. But and that's you said you love meat, and I would posit that's because you're a human being, and I think most of us do. There's a few exceptions to that, of the people that have kind of
Right.
built up a psychological aversion to it through conditioning and some of the weird stuff that people sort of try to convince people. But yeah, it's a very human diet, I think. And
Mhm.
as far as one of the criticisms will be, well, it's not sustainable. No, I'm doing it for and I can tell you, people doing it for 20 years and for 20 years fairly routinely. Do you feel that there's any struggles to sustain this?
You just were breaking up a little bit. But
I
no,
just
I
asked.
haven't had any problem sustaining it. It's been, like when my husband and I go out to eat, there's the bread issue. I've finally got to the point where do not bring it to the table because I love bread. I always have. So if I do that, I'm good.
Yeah, so the bread, the ubiquitous bread that they always bring to the table so that you don't maybe eat
Oh yeah. It's like, don't bring
the
it.
yeah, I get that. It just sits on the table and no one, I was in vacation and they brought bread. They brought a selection of croissants and pain chocolat and all this stuff that just sat on our table every breakfast. I felt, it was almost like don't bring the stuff, but they brought it anyway. And I'm just like, okay, to
Yeah.
leave there. And then it gets wasted, unfortunately, I think. Speaking of that, there's an interesting statistic that's something that 40% of our food is wasted in the United States. I think I said 8%. If food waste was a country, it'd be the third highest leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions behind US and China, or India and China, I think. So food waste is a big thing. So we're just wasting the bread. So stop bringing the bread, guys. If you're at a restaurant and we don't want it. But
Ask
you mentioned
first.
your hypertension got better. Did you come off medications with that?
I did. I monitor my blood pressure all the time. And like I said, I've battled it since I was a teenager. So we're talking a lot of years here. And I messaged my doctor one day. I said, I'm not taking it anymore. I started getting real dizzy spells and my blood pressure was low for me. And so I quit taking it. And I told him about it. And he's like, all right. But I've since had to go to a cardiologist because all the years of hypertension has done a number on my heart, evidently. And I'm on a monitor. Today's the last day. But I was having these spells where I get pretty lightheaded and then real serious heart palpitations. So they're trying to figure that out.
Interesting. Yeah. And one of the things, and I guess I would ask you, because you've got a physician and a cardiologist, are they giving you any sort of dietary advice or advising you not to eat this way?
No, I am straight up. I tell them that I'm on a ketogenic diet, more towards ketovore, carnivore, and that's the way I'm going to eat. And it's funny because just moving here in October and having to find a new doctor was interesting. I loved my doctor back home, but he wouldn't come with us. But this guy is interesting. I'll just put it that way. But he hasn't challenged it. He knows we're on keto. My husband jumped on board with me about a week or two after I started it. He's a type 1 diabetic and he's doing well, so.
Yeah, that's interesting with it. And I've seen a number of type 1 diabetics do low carb diets, ketogenic diets, carnivore diets, and they all consistently report generally very good results with regard to more stable blood glucose, less requirements for insulin, which
He used to be on the roller coaster of highs and lows constantly. And since he started with me, and he eats a lot more, he eats more vegetables than I do, but keto approved vegetables. And he's doing really good. He's pretty much averaged out his insulin and his sugar levels, and
yeah, that's good to hear. That's like I said, one of the things that diabetes, whether you get it or not, I mean, once you have it, I mean, the treatment probably is from a dietary standpoint should probably be low carb, whereas many endocrinologists will just say, well, just eat a certain amount of, decent amount of carbs and just chase it with more insulin, which is, as your husband can attest, it's very challenging to manage that because you end up, like you said, you end up with really lows and really big highs, and you're constantly, dealing with that stuff, which is a real challenge to do.
his endocrinologist back in New Hampshire would ask him when he told him he was doing keto, he's like, and that's working for you? I'm like, how could he not know a low carb diet would be good for diabetics? I'm like, give me a break here.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
it seems like it's incredible that they sort of don't realize the role that different macronutrients have on our blood glucose.
Yeah.
Well, they certainly realize carbohydrates do that, but they can't conceive the fact of limiting them or even eliminating them for some people. But it
Mhm.
certainly seems to be very beneficial. What is so as far as because a lot of people ask this, how do you do a low carb diet or carnivore diet or ketovore diet with and I don't remember what sort of gastric procedure you had, what kind of
I
bariatrics, or
had to
was it
bypass.
you had the bypass? And so
Doing it
was your stomach capacity brought down during that as well?
considerably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole cut down part of it, stapler, whatever they did.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I have because I still, after all these years, I get full really fast.
yeah. So how
So
often do you have to eat
I
it?
really try to slow down my eating, and it takes a little while, but I managed to get in about 100 grams of protein a day.
Yeah. Okay. Good for you.
I do intermittent fasting most every day. So it's usually within 2 meals.
Yeah. So 2 meals a day, 100 grams of protein a day. Yeah, that's probably a decent amount for
Mhm.
given your size. And I think
I
anything
push it.
push it, huh? Okay. And you said you get it through there through
Absolutely.
meat and eggs mostly. Do you have any negative effects from the diet? Have you been any negatives that you've seen from yourself?
I have not. Didn't have keto flu. I didn't have that they talk about. I didn't have any issues at all. I felt great. I was cooking before we moved. My son and his family lived with us, and I was cooking for everybody. They weren't keto, you know, but I did all the cooking. I made their potatoes if they wanted them. I made whatever they wanted. But the meat portion was what I wanted. And they all, whether it was a dish that had some vegetables or a broccoli dish or whatever, they all loved it. And it's like, it's easy. It's really easy. I'm like, I have had no problems. And it's thank goodness.
Yeah, it's not, and I think most people you give them a steak and they're pretty happy with that, whether it's keto or not. I mean, steak always going to taste good no matter what context the diet's in for most people. And I think one of the problem people get into, I mean, you mentioned cooking because a lot of people, it's the convenience side of things where they just use these prepackaged snacks, keto, whatever, biscuits and cookies and
I'm not
ice
gonna lie,
cream.
I have some of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I think if you eat a considerable amount of those, and some people that's their whole diet, it definitely can lead to problems for sure with overeating
Absolutely.
again. Um, I mean, do you anticipate changing the diet anytime soon, or is this what you think you're going to be staying on for the duration?
This is as long as I'm on the earth. This is it.
This is it, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
I won't go back to the way it was. It was horrible. And I felt bad. I felt real bleh. And
Yeah.
even now, if I eat too many vegetables, like I'll eat a little bit of broccoli, maybe a side salad with my steak or whatever meat I'm eating. Um, if I eat too much of it, I really feel like sluggish and I feel bloated.
Yeah.
Like, and with this lymphedema, it really scares me. So it's like, no, not going to do it.
Yeah, that's a common complaint about people when they eat a lot of vegetation. They end up getting bloated just because of the way fiber is processed in the body, where
Mhm.
it's fermented down in our lower intestines, and so that leads to accumulation of gases, which leads to bloating and on and on and on. So small amount, some people tolerate pretty well. So you're definitely kind of more meat based,
Oh yeah.
if that would be a fair statement to say. Um,
Absolutely.
this is always a question that comes up, and because it always comes up, and I think it's something that people have to learn more about it. But any problems with, blood lipids, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, any of those types of things, are those a concern for you?
I have my blood work right here.
Yeah. What does it show?
I had a lipid panel done in November. My total cholesterol was 212.
Okay.
My triglycerides were 51.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
HDL
And
was 62.
so your HDL was higher than your triglycerides, and again, this is perspective. I'd look at those numbers, and I would say that sounds pretty damn good, particularly given the overall environment that you're in.
Right.
Other people would focus on the LDL and the total and say, hey, well, we need to lower that down because there's an increased risk. But I think when we look at the overall scheme of things, losing weight, improving your blood pressure, probably a significant drop in inflammation, I would guess.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and the low triglycerides and the good favorable HDL triglyceride ratio probably are collectively more important than the single LDL number. In fact, there
Right.
was a nice study from 2019 in Korea looking at almost 13 million people, and they saw that the best place to be from an all-cause mortality standpoint was a total cholesterol between 210 and I want to say 240, I think was the upper number in there. And so you're at 212, you're kind of right in that number, and that's
Well, thankfully, the doctor didn't mention it because a doctor years ago had put me on a statin,
yeah.
and I started having pains in my arm. I couldn't raise my arms. And I looked those up and I said that was one of the side effects. So I quit taking it. And the
Yeah,
next time I went to him, I quit. I told
yeah,
him, I said, I'm not taking them anymore. That was
yeah.
bad.
Yeah, there's a recent study, meta-analysis, just looking at statin and their impact on preventing cardiovascular disease, and it's basically a pretty low absolute risk of somewhere between 0.3% and 2%,
Yeah.
depending on the complication, which is very low. And in women, it's even lower, and women that haven't had heart attacks, even lower. So, I mean, you've got, and if the side effects where you can't move, that's going to cause some problems with, there's probably more significant problems that are come secondary to not being able to move around very well.
Right.
Um, so your husband has been doing this. I don't know if you didn't mention kids or anything like that. Does anybody giving you a hard time about this? Like, hey, we think you're gonna have a hard time with this diet. It's gonna kill you and that sort of stuff.
Not at all. No, I was expecting it from the doctors because I kept hearing, watching Dr. Berry, I kept hearing all these people saying, oh, well, where do you find a doctor that's keto approved and all this stuff, or approves of keto? And when I told my doctor back in New Hampshire, he's like, okay. And in fact, after I started, I asked him to do an A1C check on me. I had never had one done. And it came back, it was 5.8. So I bought a home test. And within 3 months, the home test read 5.0 within 3 months of being on keto. However accurate they are, I knew it had to have gone down some. So then I had another one done in November, and it's right about 5.4.
Yeah. Did you? Actually, I'm surprised all those years no one had done an A1C on you after all those years of living with sort of obesity and sort of things. That's a pretty routine test. But regardless, did you notice a difference in, like, say, pain level? I mean, I can tell you as an orthopedic surgeon, a lot of knee replacement folks, even still after the knee replacement, still have some pain. Any differences in your pain or joint function since you've had change of diet?
There's definitely some. It's way better than it was. And I was told I had arthritis in my back, and that has totally gone away. I don't have any more back pain, which is, thank goodness. I had bursitis in both of my sides where I couldn't even lay on my side. And that was from months and years of sleeping in a recliner because of my knees. And that's gone. So there's been a lot of improvement.
Well, here's what I would say to you, because you'd probably describe trochanteric bursitis, which is, the side of the hips, where you sit there and we used to deal with that. I can tell you, I cannot tell you how many people I sent to therapy and did injections on, and even a few people we operate on for that. But
Yeah.
what you're saying is it got better when I changed my diet. And so
Yep.
I would say that the reason you had it in the first place because of the diet you were on before, and whether or not sitting in the recliner not had anything to do with it. And the same thing with the knee replacements, the knee arthritis, probably secondary to diet over time. We know that when we are eating a certain way and our insulin's really high, it leads to inflammatory cytokines that are in the knee. And so, I mean,
That and carrying around all that excess weight too doesn't
well,
help.
well, and the weight is causing all this inflammation as well, which is interesting. I think it's more of a biologic effect than a mechanical effect, because there's big, strong guys that don't have a lot of body fat but have a lot of muscle. They're still carrying around a ton of weight and they don't have a lot of arthritis. And so I think it's more the adiposity and then the inflammation and all those things that go with that. But unless you have a trauma, and then if you were in a car wreck and you broke your knee, then that's a little bit different issue.
Right.
Um, Anything else you'd like to share, or advice for people that are maybe were in a similar situation to you?
Well, I would have to tell them, you got to give it a shot because it's been a life change for me. And I will never go back. I wish I knew then what I've known and what I've learned now. 'Cause I wouldn't have been in that predicament. I may not have needed those knees replaced, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think you might have avoided that, and I've seen that happen. So, well, Cindy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for coming on and being willing to share your story. I'm going to sort of at this point we'll kind of wrap this segment up, and then if somebody has a question directly for Cindy, I'm gonna let's see if I can let people unmute themselves. Chronic pain, if anyone's interested, hopefully see some of you guys there. If not, we'll be back tomorrow. All right, guys, take care. Have a good day. See you later. Bye bye.